Thank you, Megan, and good evening to everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation, Promoting a New Yes to Life, Religious Education Amidst the Decline in Religious Affiliation. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Tom Beaudoin is Professor of Religion at Fordham University in New York City. Not to mention, he's very tastefully named. Professor Beaudoin is also taught at Santa Clara University and here at Boston College and is a 2001 PhD graduate from our Department of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry back when it was called the Institute of Religious Ed and Pastoral Ministry. Professor Beaudoin's research areas include theology, philosophy, and religious studies of practice, concepts and practices of religious disaffiliation and affiliation, comparative spiritual exercises across religions and cultures, and the powers of popular music understood as secularly, religiously, spiritually, theologically significant. Professor Beaudoin has written several books and many articles for academic and public audiences on theology's capacity to address what matters most to people today. He recently wrote the chapter titled Secular Catholic Families in the book Sex, Love, and Families, Catholic Perspectives, published last year by Liturgical Press. Most recently, he wrote the essay Cultural Catholicism in the Cambridge Companion to American Catholicism, just published by Cambridge University Press. He is currently working on a number of projects, one on studying visitor experience, the Pantheon in Rome, another on ordinary faith in popular music, one on religious disaffiliation, and another one on nothingness. And I've been thinking about this, and I'm presuming that, Tom, that you'll have something to say about nothing? Is that right? Okay, I want to make sure I'm understanding. Okay. Professor Beaudoin and his spouse, Dr. Martina Verba, are the proud parents of a teenager. We are very thrilled to welcome back one of our own distinguished graduates. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Tom Beaudoin.
Thank you, Dean Tom Stegman, for that introduction. I will not be talking about nothing tonight, but I will be talking about nuns. And I want to say welcome to everyone here in the room with us. Welcome to everyone online. And first, I have some recognitions. Behind an academic event like this are many people who work hard to make it happen. So I want to thank Megan de Dios for your generous invitation and your caring leadership of this event. I want to thank Cara O'Sullivan for arranging so many details so well. I'm in debt to Fordham graduate students, Victoria Pitts and Carolyn Zala, for their assistance in preparing some very nice slides that you will soon see. And I owe a great deal to my many Boston College mentors and friends. I want to make sure I acknowledge that debt first thing. I spent 5 years at Boston College as a doctoral student, and as what Dean Stegman said, was then called the Institute. Things have gotten much fancier since I graduated 20 years ago. And then I spent another 3 years teaching at Boston College in the Institute and the Theology department, essential years in starting my career and clarifying my vocation. I would never have encountered practical theology were it not for the faculty, especially my generous doctoral mentor, the inimitable Tom Groom, who is here this evening. Thank you, Tom. Yes, we can applaud Tom. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Despite Professor Groom's strong influence on my work, which I'm sure you will identify this evening, I take responsibility for the limitations of tonight's lecture. And what I have to say about religious education will express my perspective as a practical theologian, as a cisgendered, middle-aged white man, a husband of a psychotherapist, and a parent of a teenager. I come to you having studied and taught in Jesuit heritage education for 25 years, and nothing of what I say tonight has come to me quickly. Most of it has taken a quarter century to crystallize. I dedicate this lecture tonight to the memory of Dr. Stefano Montano, a recent graduate of the PhD program here in the School of Theology and Ministry. Stefano was a fellow professor with me at Fordham, and he passed away 2 weeks ago. Dr. Montano was a warm, caring, and creative scholar. He was a colleague, he was a mentor, who brought the riches of education for liberation to all with whom he shared life. He did not want us to settle for anything less than a radical vision of equality grounded in the family of all beings, the kingdom of God. As I experienced him, this was the good news to which Stefano was committed. And I believe it remains our unfinished project at Fordham in particular, and in Jesuit heritage education more broadly. I am inspired by Stefano's decolonizing vision for education and faith formation, shaped here at Boston College, and I remember him tonight. My title is Promoting a New Yes to Life, Religious Education Amidst the Decline in Religious Affiliation. I will sketch the changing landscape of Catholic affiliation. I'll recommend a posture for religious education that fits better, I think, this changing landscape. I'll open up the doors of one church that has inspired my approach, and I'll conclude with some suggestions for what might happen next. So, the changing scene of religious affiliation. Several years ago, an educator remarked to me with a mix of regret, love, and confusion that her oldest child, a young adult, had become a nun, N-O-N-E, no longer affiliated with the family's faith tradition. Leaning on our long professional connection, and given my research on changing religious affiliation, I asked if we could talk about how her experience of parenting a child who went from affiliated to disaffiliated has influenced her approach to education. It was not clear, she said, and I had the impression she did not want to talk anymore about it. It was then that I sensed that something possibly quite meaningful was going on, not just for this educator and parent, but for larger conversations about religion and education, if only we could pursue it when the time was right. This was far from an isolated experience. I would like to share some composite examples with you that are drawn from my teaching. A 21-year-old Latina undergraduate writes in an essay about respecting her parents' Central American Catholicism and taking the best values from it that she treasures, but needing to define her own way, to discover her own beliefs and practices that may take her beyond Catholicism. She has spent time with romantic partners who are of other religions or not religious, and she can imagine that her religious or non-religious future will be different from what her parents wanted. A 60-something Indian American female religious educator who volunteers in a Catholic parish says that of her 3 adult children, 1 remains an active Catholic. Neither of the other 2 seem particularly interested in being part of a religious community, but have found meaning in other things that ground them. She struggles with the tension between what she teaches and how she relates to her grown children. She rarely talks about this in the parish and has not felt comfortable with or permission for integrating this into her religious education, and she would not quite know where to begin in doing so. A white 50-something lay minister exercises leadership in a parish struggling to connect with younger generations. His partner used to be involved in the church and still participates, but the older he gets, the more he is interested in different therapies and forms of meditation. The minister keeps up appearances in the denomination as best he can, And he believes in evangelizing younger generations and promoting active church membership. But in his most honest moments, he wonders what the future holds and whether he is ready to meet it. And moreover, how this is part of God's plan for his church. What I would really like to underscore is the empirical reality that close to home for religious educators, there is a wealth of such untold stories. Yet, apart from sharing stories, usually discreetly, from person to person, most seem to keep it to themselves and do not bring it explicitly into their educating, into their ministry. The changing affiliation of family and friends of Catholic ministers and educators, or of ministers and educators themselves, is one of the open secrets of the church. It remains largely unacknowledged and unintegrated. I would like that to change, because changing the silence around it would help us as educators in Catholic heritage institutions to creatively engage the broader changes in religious affiliation. When I talk about the decline in religious affiliation, I'm referring to the rise of the so-called nones, those who do not claim a religious affiliation, but also I'm referring to the increase in what I would call affiliational diversity more broadly. People who are moderately affiliated, unaffiliated, multiply affiliated, and people who move around between affiliations within and outside of religious communities. Another way of talking about affiliational diversity would be to talk about non-normative affiliations. I will use both terms, affiliational diversity and non-normative affiliations. Let me back up, though, and say something about what I mean by normative affiliation. I use the phrase normative affiliation to describe what is actually taken by people as obligatory about Catholicism. Obligations and expectations that people learn from those with a shaping authority in their life, history, and culture. From familial elders to religion teachers to bishops and beyond. In other words, normative affiliation is not what's on the books, it's what people experience from authority figures. It's a lived phenomenon. I then use the phrase non-normative affiliation to refer to people practicing differently, holding their lives together differently than those who manage the boundaries of formal religious identity would endorse. This non-normative affiliation will vary according to the person's and the group's Catholic cultures, and is quite nuanced on the ground. For example, counting oneself as Catholic but not attending church. Not counting oneself as Catholic but occasionally attending church. Participating in or claiming membership in more than one denomination or more than one religion. Or espousing beliefs or undertaking practices that are at odds with what are taken to be official Catholic expectations. Non-normative is relative to what is taken to be normative, and vice versa. These terms are always relational. So we cannot assume that expectations about and practices of belonging and non-belonging, believing and non-believing are exactly the same from context to context. In other words, what counts as normative Catholicism will vary based on what has been taught and enforced from context to context, and so too what counts as non-normative. It's a living, moving phenomenon. That said, Catholic heritage, religious, and theological education in the USA seems to me almost entirely pitched toward encouraging what is taken to be proper belief and practice, and entirely pitched toward active affiliation, with few exceptions. Non-normative affiliation in practice means affiliational diversity, a term I will use several more times. In the USA, Catholics are more likely to be modestly affiliated, marginally affiliated, and unaffiliated with church than to be highly affiliated. Affiliational diversity means a wide range of ways of relating to what is taken to officially matter. Taking the care to be curious about affiliational diversity, this is really the heart of what I'm going to say. Taking the care to be curious about affiliational diversity can turn our attention to how people navigate in their lived experience what they take to be the expectations of their inherited religious tradition. Affiliational diversity becomes central for Roman Catholicism as we notice data here from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. Notice data about declining overall numbers of children presented for baptism and confirmation, fewer adults for church marriage, fewer men for ordination, while the sacrament of reconciliation is rarely chosen. The practices of affiliation in Catholic families are not generating the sustaining mass of lifelong adult adherence to which the Church has been accustomed and on which its institutional life is thought to depend. The Second Vatican Council, as everyone watching this will know, called for the full, conscious, and active participation of the whole Church. And while this call inspired monumental strides in lay empowerment, this vision of full, conscious, and active participation has definitely not come about in the United States. As I have discussed elsewhere, this is not for lack of trying on the part of educators. Decades of educators' advocacy of a sacramental imagination and social justice have not prevented the affiliational slide, nor has the assertive promotion of the new evangelization been able to prevent it. In this lecture, I will not rehearse in detail the statistics about Catholicism's affiliation crisis. I will presume you are familiar with them. You know that the Pew Research Center reported that 13% of all U.S. adults are former Catholics. There are 6.5 former Catholics in the U.S. for every convert to the faith. No other religious group, now quoting the study verbatim, no other religious group has experienced anything close to this ratio of losses to gains via religious switching. You have heard this very year that the respected research organization Gallup reported, quote, Americans' membership in houses of worship has dropped below 50% for the first time in Gallup's 8-decade trend. You have probably learned that this year, the Public Religion Research Institute reported that about 1/4 of people in the USA describe themselves as not affiliated with religion. Sorry, this is the slide on declining church membership. Here's a slide on people not identifying with religion. That's the purple part of each of those segments of the population there. That's 36% of those 18 to 29. They also report that religious disaffiliation varies somewhat by ethnicity and race. I'm going to spend a little time on this tonight. Religious disaffiliates are 34% of Asian or Pacific Islander persons, 34% of multiracially identified persons, 28% of Native American persons, 23% of white non-Hispanic persons, 21% of black non-Hispanic persons, 19% of Hispanic persons. And as of 2019, the number of unaffiliated persons in the USA surpassed Roman Catholics. I would like to draw our attention to an underappreciated aspect of affiliational diversity, its racial and ethnic broadness. As PRRI suggests, and despite media representations of white young people as nuns, it is far from only a white phenomenon. In fact, as Russell Jung, John Jimenez, and Eric Marr of San Francisco State University have recently summarized, quote, Asian Americans have the highest rates of religious nuns of any racial group, unquote. Moreover, in a new article, Generation Z, Minority Millennials, and Disaffiliation from Religious Communities, Not Belonging and the Cultural Cost of Unbelief, sociologist April Faye Manalang of Norfolk State University engages the literature on persons of color disaffiliating from religion and conducts 45 in-depth interviews with Filipino, Hispanic, and African American persons in Virginia. In light of the small existing literature and her interviews, Manalong argues that younger generations of color practice disaffiliation from religion in distinct ways, because they must negotiate costs that many white disaffiliates do not face. While carefully noting differences in these three communities and how they negotiate religious participation, Manalong nonetheless argues that younger generations of color tend to share certain postures about their non-belief or non-participation in religion. Quoting, Gen Z and minority millennials are clearly hesitant to officially disaffiliate from the church because they feel a cultural cost of unbelief vis-a-vis their families. In other words, just because they are skeptical of the church and state that they do not believe the teachings of the church does not necessarily mean they will disidentify with the church either. Family acceptance and fear of disapproval also play a major role with respect to how they navigate unbelief, unquote. Continuing, culture, social justice, and activism, as well as empowerment, matter to minority millennials, she writes. It is reasonable to assume that the motivations for why Gen Z and minority millennials are leaving the church are for different reasons than whites. Since whites tend to be the demographic majority in churches, they are far less likely to feel racially and culturally excluded if they detach from religious belief and practice. Social developments regularly remind us of these deep changes. In political activism, the Occupy Wall Street movement has been analyzed by political scientists as a civil religion of the nones, operating on a theology of consensus. Practical theologian and religious educator Leah Gunning Francis, in her book Ferguson and Faith, showed how Black Lives Matter activists in Ferguson were often not part of churches, and the role of ministers was to support them as protest chaplains, accepting the non-affiliation of many young protesters. One minister was convinced, quoted in her book, by the idea that, quote, you need to get out into the streets with the young people. You do not need to tell them to get into your churches because they haven't been there and they're not going. You need to go out there and let them lead, and you need to listen, unquote. In education, just a few months ago, Harvard announced that its new head chaplain, Greg Epstein, is a non-religious humanist and atheist, lauded by students and other chaplains for his ministerial skills. Epstein is the author of the book Good Without God. Reasons for the non-normative belongings of Catholics are complex. Some move in that direction due to dissatisfying interpersonal or ministerial relationships in the church. Others grow weary of disconnected ritual. Many feel a lack of church teaching's relevance to life, compounded by the sexual abuse crisis and cover-up. I think that the deepest reasons for the current changes in Catholic affiliation have to do with changing cultural assumptions about being religious. What I mean is that the benefits for staying in line for Catholics and the penalties for not staying in line for Catholics and other established religious traditions, not just Catholicism. These benefits and penalties no longer motivate as broadly and deeply as they once did. There are lesser appreciated conditions for generating non-affiliation, like economic security preventing people from getting to church, racism deterring Catholics of color from participating, class biases preventing outreach to working class and poor Catholic families, and parish closings making getting to Mass more difficult. But I think the deepest reason is the changing cultural assumptions about being religious. Despite the great variety of families in which these affiliation changes are occurring, there are two commonalities. First, it is hard to discuss openly. Second, it is difficult to integrate non-normatively affiliated persons and their visions into a vision for Catholic religious education, to let them change religious education. In 2021, for a Catholic religious educator to present, or for a highly Catholic affiliated Catholic parent, to present their loosely affiliated relatives or disaffiliated relatives as exemplars for other Catholics is basically unheard of. For many Catholic ministers, educators, and parents, there's something embarrassing or even shameful about it. People whose families are not living up to full conscious and active participation are often made to feel less than in religious education discourse. And their stories are often presumed to be stories of loss for the church, decline for the church, and failure of the church. A new posture toward the disaffiliation crisis. What I will recommend is not meant to be a universal approach for religious education. It is only meant, please note, it is only meant to help those who have the freedom to try something new. Not everyone does. People who find themselves in the situation where what they have inherited does not work in the face of affiliational diversity. If you find yourself resonating with what I'm discussing, maybe it will help you. I propose that for those whose disposition and situation allows for a new posture, that posture in religious education be one of promoting affiliational diversity through religious education in ways that fit different community needs, specific existential situations, and varying life stages. By religious education that promotes affiliational diversity, I do not mean only teaching about other paths than the sponsoring tradition. There is an exciting, growing field of interreligious education, although I mean something different. I mean starting with people we serve and learning about paths that are considered non-normative, but that matter for them. Whether that be other religions in the singular or in combination, whether that be their home religion, whether that be new religious movements, or whether that be noneness. I mean educating to facilitate encouragement and freedom for others to be highly affiliated, moderately affiliated, or non-affiliated with the sponsoring tradition. The religious educator can become someone who helps people and communities say a free yes to their own lives, to grow toward meeting the moment in a socially and existentially responsive spirituality. This yes is not only for those in our care. One's yes and freedom for a yes is entangled with others. We are social beings. And even though I believe we should be free to have the dignity of coming to our own beliefs and practices, our beliefs and practices impact others and are impacted by others. So it's never an individual decision purely. The yes to life that religious education promotes must be a yes that helps others say their own yes. This is an education to encourage people being who they need to be, loving who they need to love and what they need to love, such that others' freedom for a good life is ennobled. What I am suggesting is that religious education that currently explicitly or implicitly prizes high affiliation in the sponsoring tradition will need to be more non-directive, more like non-directive models of spiritual direction, like non-directive models of chaplaincy, non-directive models of community organizing, accompanying people in clarifying what they want in their relationship to their claiming power and how they get it. We need to encourage spiritual agency. I think we can make explicit to those in our care that their journey is their journey, and our education in faith is geared toward that. I think we need to be able to communicate to those in our care that with respect to their religious affiliation, it's okay to stay. It is okay to go. And it is okay not to know. In other words, there can be integrity in affiliation, in non-affiliation, or in uncertainty about where one belongs and what one should practice and believe. Anything less than this guarantees educators lose contact with those we should be serving, those who might transform whatever is too small about our vision for becoming. The Pantheon as inspiration. My advocacy for affiliational diversity through religious education is inspired in part by a Catholic church, the Basilica di Santa Maria ad Martiris in Rome, also known as the Pantheon, which I have been studying since 2004. Currently, with the assistance of a grant from the Templeton Religion Trust for my project, The Art of the Pantheon, Learning from Visitors, I am researching what the Pantheon's global visitors experience there. I am inspired by the Pantheon because through its example, it presents us with how Christian churches are paradoxically more than Christian when we integrate their more than Christian heritage and experiencers. In other words, the Pantheon shows us how churches harbor an affiliational diversity that is usually covered over by the ideal affiliation presented by its ministers and educators. The Pantheon is a palimpsest of ancient Roman religion, an imperial aspiration, of late antique, medieval, and modern Catholicism, and of modern Italian culture and politics. Different parts of the church have meant different things to different people over the centuries and became part of the church through other religious heritages. Instead of there being one controlling meaning for faith or practice, people take up many relationships to what is on offer. Moreover, the changing official significations of the architecture and art communicated to visitors through evolving placards and videos. They leave room for affiliational diversity by anticipating diverse people's diverse interests. While the Pantheon has not been a parish church for hundreds of years, as a basilica, it still offers Mass on weekends and holy days, and it presents occasional Christian-themed concerts or recitals. Here's an organ recital a couple of years ago. The monumental architecture of the Pantheon is famous, with its temple front, intermediate block, and rotunda capped by a massive, unsupported concrete dome, permanently open to air, light, rain, and occasionally snow, with an oculus 9 feet across. Architecture scholars credit the Pantheon as the most influential building in all of Western architecture. Built around the years 115 to 120 of the Common Era, it is now approaching 2,000 years of existence. Its original purposes are a matter of scholarly debate, although very early it was known as Pantheon, for all gods. Sometime possibly early in the 7th century, it became a Catholic church and has operated continuously since then. Identifying marks of its Christianness are evident. There is an altar in the niche directly opposite the entrance with a colorful medieval cross-themed stonework design in the apse behind. There are copies of an icon of Mary and Jesus possibly gifted to the Pantheon very early. Stations of the cross are hung around the circumference. Sculptures and paintings of saints occupy the niches around the rotunda. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is featured most commonly. There is a modest organ to the side of the altar. In recent years, several rows of mobile pews have been set in front of the altar and left out all day long. The 2 weekend masses offered at the Basilica, the Pantheon, each draw around 75 to 150 people, based on my count. Massgoers are a tiny part of the church's guests. There were 9.7 million visitors in 2019. Many of those visitors are surprised to find out that the Pantheon is a church. Some leave unsure whether it is or not. It is understandable. Looking at the structure from the outside, there is nothing to identify it as Christian. Today, the piazza flows right to the temple front, and many people wander in, even if it was not on their itinerary. Maybe you have as well. There are no tickets or entrance fees, although now with Corona on the weekend, you have to reserve it in advance online, but there's no fee. Even today, people walking in can experience some fundamental aspects of the structure's original design from 115 to 120, which corresponded to a different theology, that of ancient Roman religion. Even today, one enters amidst high, thick columns holding up the massive pediment and flanked by apses, now vacant of gods, now vacant of emperors, on either side of the temple porch. Passing through the columns, you approach giant doors, and the eye is drawn through the doors to the great apse directly across, which in antiquity here featured the statue of a god. Yet come closer, and you see above the door an ancient metal grille, through which the sunlit oculus can be glimpsed partly through its thin grating. Just as the temple porch has sheltered and contained the visitor on all sides, the empty center of the dome beckons through the grille above the door. This is often where curiosity begins and astonishment commences. As you pass the threshold and enter the vast circular space, almost everyone immediately looks up to view the oculus directly, an empty circle, the color of the sky at that moment. This simple progressive mystagogy of porch, door, rotunda, oculus, this stepwise revelation was apparently intentional in the ancient architecture that wanted to reveal the divinity of the sun and all who stand in its light, such as the emperor. The simultaneous cosmic earthly proximity and distance. The oculus often seems to visitors dangerously close, and yet imposingly, presidingly, dizzyingly distant. Surrounding visitors even today are 15 niches laid out around the circumference that it is obvious to most would have housed an array of gods in antiquity, an assumption confirmed by scholarly research. As visitors pace the open center or visit the ancient modern statues and altars around the periphery, it is impossible not to notice that the sunlight is projecting in a beam down into the rotunda, projecting into the dome, or the attic, or the main order, or directly on the floor, as here. These are all features from another time and theology that still influence visitor experience. I do not have the time here tonight to outline scholarship about how in Roman antiquity a curated passage under a monumental structure into an open space of sunbeams, statues, and altars exemplified an older theology, an ancient Catholicism of Rome. My point is that the Pantheon is a Catholic church and at the same time is more than Christian. Visitors seem to have a variety of experiences in the significance of their visit. This is what I will spend the next 2 years investigating in more detail. For some, it confirms what they think of as Christian experience. For others, it is more of a museum. For still others, there is an impact that is neither Christian nor purely informational, what some would call a moving or memorable spiritual experience. And as a venerable church in one of the most ancient, fully intact buildings in the West and the world, it belongs both to Christians and to the world. It belongs to people of all affiliations. The Pantheon is a church permanently on loan to us from its non-Christian heritage. It makes us ask, of what church is this not true? Likewise, we each have faith on loan from others. With regard to Christian faith, the heritage, at least of Christian faith, is profoundly more than Christian. Most basically in a Jewish Jesus who was himself never a Christian. We are, in the words of philosopher Corey Anton, wholly on loan to ourselves from ideas and practices that we did not invent and that we cannot control. In Anton's words, we should accept that we are incomplete, dependent, and non-self-sufficing, living out our days in borrowed space and on borrowed time. A church on loan from its more than Christian heritage, experienced by diverse people, does not suggest a narrow vision for affiliation will fit this Catholicism. Such a vision for religious education would be too small to hold the many aesthetic doors that visitors open, the diverse backgrounds they bring, and the experiences they have. I believe this holds potential for educators who promote affiliation not in relationship to an ideal teaching, but in relationship to what people actually need for their lives. For those who are educators in a church context, your local church may not be anything like the Pantheon, but it probably still employs artwork, rituals, and architecture that have a shaping power on people and are derived from elsewhere, now making your church the sacred place on loan that it is. The Pantheon welcomes anyone and makes few expectations of them, without hiding its Catholic identity, but also without hiding its other interwoven identities. It is Catholic, yes, but paradoxically, that means it's not reducible to Catholicism. The Pantheon shows a Catholicism that is open to the world and the cosmos, that lets show its constituent and constitutive more than Catholic parts. And most important, just as Pantheon visitors may or may not take up the offer of the Pantheon's Catholicism, aren't there also people in your local situation who live with integrity as fully in, partly in, or mostly out of affiliation? People who cope in their own way in relation to what your local church offers. In this lecture, I have tried to show why it is worth considering a religious education that promotes diverse affiliation in situations where it formerly valorized a single, usually high affiliation. What might this look like in formal religious education contexts, like parish ministry, high school teaching, or campus ministry, or informal contexts like parenting, grandparenting, friendship, marriage, partnership. I have a few suggestions for helping people we serve to understand their faith and life possibilities and letting them go where they need to go, encouraging our students and parishioners and children and those in our care to befriend and to love who they are drawn to encourage them to be unafraid of being changed by friendship, unafraid of being changed by love. Affiliational diversity means, especially for younger generations, freedom to love, freedom to be loved, inside the inherited religious fold and outside the inherited religious fold. This is especially important for younger generations who are the most religiously and non-religiously diverse in United States history. Promoting affiliational diversity. There is no quick correction because the deeper change is a matter of how educators are formed and how educators are supervised. And that takes time and institutional resources. So I cannot outline a program here. But there are a number of things that those who agree with this vision can consider. Promoting affiliational diversity will mean that those of us who teach and have responsibility for formation teach not only out of what we consider to be the heart of the tradition, but also its margins, its dissenters, its doubters, its half-believers, its leavers. Affiliational diversity invites us educators to teach not only the official stances, but the varieties of lived religion in your context. This means that as educators, we need to learn better how people actually hold life together. This will call for, among other things, a new kind of ethnographic consciousness, a new kind of ethnographic body-mindedness on the part of the educator, and to teach from that ethnographic body-mindedness. As educators, we can cultivate the courage to teach our own uncertainties, to teach our own doubts, to teach our questions. Instead of defending a position or teaching as universally applicable no matter how great we think it is, we can present ourselves as in process, present ourselves as in transition, present ourselves as capable of changing our minds because we have in the past. Present ourselves as on the beautiful and difficult discovery process called adulthood. We can choose to teach our changing relationship to what we have discovered matters in life. We can learn from our own process. To go back to the beginning of this lecture, educators also have a lot to learn from the practices of parents whose children affiliate differently than the parents do, and from the practices of friends who weather deep religious or spiritual changes, but maintain and even deepen their friendship. We need substantial research about this, as well as to encourage frank discussions of it in our educating. I want to say a specific word to white educators, and especially to white male educators like myself. I believe we cannot assume we know how to effectively accompany persons of color, unless and until we work to understand what changing affiliations mean in various cultural contexts. White religious and theological educators and researchers cannot avoid asking whether we are promoting a new colonialism in our assumptions about what religion means, what affiliation means, and what disaffiliation means. I also think that the larger, culturally diverse conversation in Catholic heritage education cannot avoid more directly engaging the question how to promote non-normative affiliations across culturally diverse contexts. This option will require many white educators, including me, to take care in learning about what those in our care want and need. And it will challenge all of us to not make assumptions about different racial and ethnic groups and persons and what they must or must not become religiously. Unfortunately, speaking frankly about most of this, about affiliational diversity, is often, to use a local Boston reference, a third rail. You can get electrocuted touching it. However, I would like to see working groups of educators collaborating interculturally, to use a term from Professor Stefano Montano's research, and also here with us tonight, Professor Hosman Espino, who's written very persuasively about interculturality. As Professor Espino puts it in a recent chapter, interculturality means, quote, members of all cultures in a diverse context fully participating in the construction of knowledge, unquote. And here I'm applying that to an intercultural collaboration about creative pedagogical responses to the new realities of changing affiliation. I close this evening, as I should, with St. Ignatius, because I think a new theological reading of the Sisipe prayer from the 4th week of the spiritual exercises in the light of religious disaffiliation might inspire this approach to religious education. In this famous prayer, and in the light of the realities of religious disaffiliation, we can see the figure of Ignatius taking a profound spiritual risk. As the text says, as you know, making an offering of myself, to quote the prayer. As the famous prayer has it, quote, take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. All that I have and possess. Now let me pause there. In other words, everything that has kept Ignatius connected to the church, everything that has kept Ignatius connected to Christ, all his investment in what we would call religious affiliation is contemplated standing released. The prospect of surrendering every tie, including every allegiance to a faith tradition, is in principle broached right here. The surrender is emphasized by the lines, quote, you, Lord, have given all that to me. I now give it back to you, O Lord. All of it is yours. Dispose of it according to your will, unquote. In other words, nothing pertaining to memory, nothing pertaining to understanding, nothing pertaining to will, including the promises that religious affiliation was supposed to guarantee, including the identity that religious affiliation was supposed to secure. Nothing is at his disposal. Now, I'm not suggesting a literal reading of the exercises as if the exercises are Ignatius's actual reports of his own practice. and I am not suggesting that Ignatius intended in his time to contemplate being a nun. Rather, I think the prayer itself has a potency that meets this moment in a salutary way. Yet in this prayer, we immediately see how frightening the prospect of promoting affiliational diversity really is, of letting loose the affiliations that were supposed to tell us who we are. We have an extraordinary moment in this prayer, a striking possibility, even if the surrender cannot be sustained for more than a moment. And indeed, it cannot. What we read next tells us that Ignatius is ambivalent about staying spiritually indifferent to affiliation. He pulls back partway from the brink and begs, quote, "Give me your love and your grace." Partway from the brink. "Give me your love and your grace, for this is sufficient for me," unquote. But what has taken place here? What has taken place? Are God's love and grace meant to decompose the old constitutive church affiliation? Or are they, out of anxiety perhaps, effectively substitutes out of the fear of contemplating becoming none? This moving ambivalence, a very human ambivalence, at what is often considered the apex of the spiritual exercises, gives us a glimpse of the prospect of spiritual indifference toward affiliation. It is there for a moment. This Ignatian space for affiliational diversity, space for spiritual indifference to affiliation, is a pantheonic space, making space for those who will stay, for those who will hang out when they can, and those who are just passing through. I have spoken tonight of people, those who do not fit normative affiliation, of place, the Pantheon, and practice, starting to piece together a new vision, pursuing affiliational indifference. Who are the people in your context whose stories need to come more to the center now? What places encourage you to educate more fittingly in this moment? What practices will help you take the next step forward? I do not think that any single proposal will be creative enough to fully meet the challenges we face, given the deep changes taking place and that will continue to take place. If you are an educator inclined toward my proposal, please reconstruct it for your context, for your own use. If you are an educator not so inclined, but you are committed to helping people, especially in the younger generations, to tend the mystery of their lives, please know that you have a conversation partner in me. It is truly an honor this evening to be back at a place of my own profound formation at Boston College, in the presence of mentors, colleagues, and friends in person here at BC and online. Thank you for listening. So we now have 5 minutes to process amongst ourselves with these questions to stimulate the conversation. Then we're going to come back to comments and questions and responses and things like this, with the great caveat that they will live forever on the internet, right? So here are 3 questions to prime the pump here. In light of the lecture, who are the people in your context whose stories need to come more to the center? Second, what places inspire you to educate more fittingly as religious affiliations change? And third, what practices might help you take the next step forward? So we're going to take 5 minutes, conversation with whoever's nearby or chatting if you're online, and then we'll come back. So turn it over to you. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you, Dean Stegman. I was always unsuccessful as a high school teacher in getting people to come back in a prompt manner. So we have Riley, I believe. Yes, Riley. Thank you, Riley, with the microphone. And as I understand our process, we're going to have some conversation here with the in-person group, and then there's going to be a presentation of some of the comments from online too. So Riley, I leave it up to you, please. Oh, it said, please raise your hand if you have a question, and Riley will, or a comment, and Riley will come over to you.
Hi, my name's Bill Horan. I've been talking to this gentleman here who's somewhat of a minority student. He was telling me how his history of getting into Boston College. But my question has to do with the so-called diversity. And originally, St. Ignatius of Loyola, he insisted that no tuition fees whatsoever be charged to the students because he wanted to keep it diverse. He wanted the poor to participate with the rich. Now, today, Catholic education, this gentleman says it's over $80,000 a year for tuition, for fees generally. So in Catholic education generally has been getting so expensive that it's not so diverse. It's becoming contained more and more. Now, a lady that taught here, according to Thomas Groom, Mary Perkins Ryan, she was taught the summer school. She wrote a book, Are Parochial Schools the Answer? In the subtitle, Catholic Education in Light of the Council. She dealt with this question. And she said that her theme basically is that it's becoming so contained that on the secondary and primary levels, we should give up basically general education and use those resources for religious formation and let the public schools go ahead with general education. Now,
Bill, I mean, you're raising such deep questions about the cost of Catholic higher education. I don't know. I honestly think I don't have the expertise to say anything meaningful about that. I mean, there are several people in the room who do, but I agree with you. It is a tremendous challenge, and the debt burden on young people is a considerable moral issue. And many years ago, I wrote several things advocating for Jesuit heritage institutions to try to move toward being free. But in order to keep us centered on the question of affiliation, I want to try to kind of keep moving with the questions, if that's okay, honoring the deep moral seriousness of what you have raised. Please, thank you. Riley. Someone in the back there, someone I recognize.
Oh. Thank you very much, Tom, for your lecture. One question that came to my mind as you were thinking, reflecting on the diverse affiliation. What have you thought about idolatry and redeeming idolatry? Mindful that any concept that we have about God will always be sufficient. Somehow those people who are diversely affiliated perhaps are showing us the way into something that we have not perhaps for 1,000 years or more in our tradition.
So, Dr. Espino, are you went one way and then you went another way. So I want to make sure I'm tracking your subtle theologic here. I thought you were saying, what about the need of educators to correct or reprove the idolatries of the younger generations? But it sounds like you're saying, what about the need for educators to correct and reprove or have corrected our own idolatries about affiliation? Is that where you're going? Yeah, I'm getting a peace sign from him on that. Oh, the second one. Oh, no, it's not a peace sign. It's the second one. Yes. Okay. They're both good. So the second one. Okay. Yeah. So is there a preoccupation with high affiliation or normative affiliation a kind of idolatry? It could be, yes. Yeah. It could be. I tend to shy away from using language like idolatry because that kind of language really quickly puts some people here and other people over here. It's a real dividing kind of language, the idolaters and everybody else. That said, when you fill out the meaning of idolatry, then it does make some sense. What we could also call it reification or kind of the way I would rather put it is it's a vision that's too small, and it has not been educated enough by the actual people who are in the room or who should be in the room. So I agree with you. I think we're just using slightly different language about it, but I like your twist. Thank you.
I love the lecture. It was great. I found it personally meaningful. I took the premise as a contributing factor, this idea of difference of relationship with affiliation over time in the new generation. But my question would be, is there a temptation to take this as a bit of a detour around issues of religious reconciliation, particularly younger generations, or even members of older generations who have felt betrayed, misserved, or very meaningful, painful ways hurt, oppressed by what they've received? Are we at risk of making a detour around substantial problems?
So the question is, what about religious reconciliation with older generations, if I'm hearing you correctly, who have been hurt and younger too?
I don't think it's just an age bound.
Right. Okay. So would we be running around that instead of doing hard work of intra and intergeneral religious reconciliation? I think that's a really, really good question. And I want to think more about that. I have, let me put it this way, because I don't want to give any kind of glib response. It's a very serious question. Part of what I didn't talk about tonight, and that I was going to if I would have had an hour and a half, is the issue of grieving. And this has not been dealt with at all, I think, sufficiently in religious education, ministry more broadly. The grieving of the Vatican II generation and above about what's happened in the church in terms of affiliation, the grieving of parents that happens when their children go a different direction, grieving when siblings go different directions. There's very little to hold on to process that in a way that can be public and safe and frank in ministry. So that's part of the hurt that I see here. One of my students a number of years ago, when her daughter left the church, really said she never stopped grieving at that point. And there was really nothing in the ministerial situation or the educational situation to help acknowledge and process that and value that. So that is also unhealed, right? Question is, for me, you can't force people to do that reconciliational work, right? So there's a larger conversation to be had about how do people's griefs get acknowledged, and how does education is a part of sponsoring that. And I don't think, kind of thinking with you now, I don't think you have to have only affiliated people in the room to deal with hurts. Put it that way. I think you can have a wide affiliational diversity and deal with that. But it's going to take intentional pedagogy around those injuries. And the sexual abuse crisis and cover-up and the people who changed affiliation or left permanently because of that is just one example of being able to try to bring people together who are still in or who are out or who are on the margins but are all grieving. So it's a profound question. Thank you.
So we're probably going to do just one more question and then transition to our online audience. As you've noticed, the handheld mic goes in and out, which means our Zoom audience can't hear it. So we're just going to try this one. Okay?
Yeah, for context, my question goes back to the problem you look at, which is raw data of decline. And I guess, what is success exactly in this context, and how do we measure it? Are we going to try? Is the end goal of your solution to be filling the pews back up to numbers that they were before, or is there something else to success that your solutions can speak to?
That's a good question. And let me just think out loud with you for a minute about it. So the question, if you couldn't hear and you're online, the question is, what does success mean now? What does success in ministry and education mean now, given affiliational shifts? Are we trying to go back to the higher numbers of yesteryear? I would say, first of all, it helps to have a historical consciousness which is one thing I learned at Boston College. The high numbers of yesteryear were high numbers for a time and for specific reasons that had to do with certain cultural conditions. And just to take the Catholic Church and no other denomination as an example, the levels of, let's say, participation, if this can even be measured across centuries, have waxed and waned and have meant different things, and there have been different expectations. So we can't, to go back to Dr. Espino's point, we can't make an idol of one era and say, oh, if only we could go back to those numbers, right? Then we would really be the church again, right? Because that's doing exactly what Dr. Espino is talking about, which is selecting out one piece and making it normative for everything else. But it's just one historical time. So no, I don't think we should be trying to go back. But the decline is instructive because then you see the empirical data, okay? What is success then? Well, I think, I'll be honest with you, I think we have to discover, if I can put it like this, we have to discover together what the new vision for religious education is and what the new mission of the church is in this environment. It's not for me to stand here and to say what it is or what success is, because we have the vision that has been operative and that has not succeeded in stemming the tide of disaffiliation has not been a vision that carried all voices. So the more voices we have in articulating what the church can be and what religious education can be for, the more polycentric visions of success we will have. It doesn't have to be one thing. The definition of a successful church and ministry and education will shift from context to context. But Brett Hoover at Loyola Marymount has advocated, to your point, what he calls a historical pastoral approach to the disaffiliation crisis. And I think it's an interesting thought about success. He says, three things should happen in a historical pastoral approach. One is that the church should accept disaffiliation as a given and adjust its ministerial footprint, not try to go backwards. The church and teachers, educators, ministers should share their own pain, their own fears, and their own doubts about the current moment. Frank speech, what the scriptures and philosophical tradition before that call paresia, free and frank speech in the face of danger. And then third, Dr. Hoover says, the church and educators need to grapple honestly with what the church did to help cause the disaffiliation crisis. Right? So that might be part of success, but I'm not going to define that for the big picture. We need to do that together as we go forward. I think Jesuit heritage education should play a role in that. Yeah, thank you. So now we can move to online, please.
Okay, thank you very much for those answers. There are a number of questions here that are kind of related, so I'm hoping to lump them together a little bit. You've presented to us an interesting kind of like theoretical potential approach, but how might this be applied in concrete practice? People are asking about things such as how much time we're spending in education, in religious education, how to navigate issues with perhaps uninterested administration and some of these concrete things. Do you have any suggestions for concrete teacher practice?
So the question about concrete teacher practices, the question about uninterested administration, can you say a little, administrators uninterested in expanding a vision, is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's basically what they're referring to.
Yeah. That probably doesn't happen very much, does it? Once in a while. Once in a while. There are some amazing administrators out there, though, who get this situation. So concrete teacher practices, especially if you have administration that may not be fully interested in this. Well, I've tried to be maybe even a little more specific than maybe even I have said, because I think one thing that we have to do is to take seriously and talk about the data and integrate the data into the teaching. Integrate the data into the teaching. We're teaching about Catholicism. What are we teaching about? Well, this is what the tradition is like today in terms of practices. And that's why I spend time with the data and integrate it into the educating. Another piece is to root down in a place that inspires your practice, because these visions just don't come from nowhere. Your capacity to imagine next steps just don't come from nowhere. So one place that inspires a practice for me is the Basilica of Santa Maria, the Pantheon, okay? That doesn't have to be anyone else's place. But what place is it? So naming a place for you, understanding how that place can give permission and inspiration and resources for imagining your practice differently is important. So my reluctance to start to name a host of concrete teaching practices is because I think we're at the very front end of this phenomenon in terms of educating. And what we need is a lot of people experimenting and sharing your experiments, sharing your good news about this with other people, right? So at the very least, in terms of teaching, which I do every single day, I'm teaching 2 classes this semester. I'm a teacher as well, and every single day I'm in this reality. Whether my students are diversely affiliated or my ministers have family or congregants or people in their care who are diversely affiliated. So I'm dealing with this every day too. So one thing that's very important to keep in mind is to change our sense of what our resources are. The resources are not just the official documents that have to be communicated. The resources are the embodied coping of the people in the community with what they have inherited. That should change your teaching if that's your resource. When you show up, you say, how do we know what the embodied coping with the inherited heritage is in this school, in this neighborhood? How do we know that? That's going to take some work on the part of teachers. It's going to take some facilitating on the part of administrators as well. It's about new forms of attention. And it's also about new ways of letting unaffiliated students, moderately affiliated students, know that they are as important as the highly affiliated students. And that this education and this theology is as much about and for people who said no thank you as for the people who say yes, more please. And that is a relational thing. Now I feel like I'm preaching here a little bit, but that's a relational thing that we pass on through our own embodiment in the educating space, in how we acknowledge people's affiliational diversity and not perpetuate the silence. So what are the practices of lifting the silence in your classroom, in your parish, in your chaplaincy, in wherever that is? You know what that is. I don't know what that is for you. What are the practices of lifting the silence around that? Right? So that those realities can be made reflexive on our educating. Because as I said, the alternative is not to be relevant.